Elon Musk walks into a gas station. His actions leave everyone speechless. The sun hung high in the sky, casting harsh, unrelenting light over the dusty gas station. Situated at the edge of a lonely highway, it was the kind of place most travelers hurried through without a second glance. The pumps looked like they hadn't been updated in decades, their paint peeling under the weight of time, and the convenience store windows were smeared with grime, half obscuring the shelves of chips, soda, and canned goods inside. Inside, the atmosphere was stagnant. An elderly cashier sat slouched behind the counter, idly flipping through an ancient tabloid magazine. His thick glasses magnifying eyes that were half closed in boredom. A faded radio perched on a shelf behind him croaked out the soft strains of a country song, but even that seemed to be struggling to stay alive. At the back of the store, two men loitered near the racks of beer and snacks. They wore matching leather jackets emblazoned with Skull and Gear insignias on the back. One of them, a burly man with a patchy beard and a perpetual sneer, thumbed through a row of snack cakes as if sizing them up for a fight. His companion, wiry with a shock of greasy hair and tattoos snaking up his arms, leaned against the cooler, his eyes scanning the room with the twitchy alertness of someone itching for trouble. The grumble of an approaching car pulled their attention to the glass doors. A sleek black Tesla rolled into the lot, its reflective surface gleaming like a predator's skin under the relentless sunlight. The contrast was almost laughable, a luxury electric car pulling up to a place that seemed stuck 20 years in the past. Even the cashier perked up, his curiosity breaking through his habitual lethargy. The Tesla glided to a stop beside one of the pumps. The doors opened with an almost inaudible hiss, and a man stepped out. He was tall and sharply dressed, his navy suit immaculate despite the heat. He adjusted his jacket with a practiced ease, his every movement deliberate and controlled. His face, though striking, was unreadable, his eyes scanning the station as if taking in every detail. The bikers exchanged glances, their smirks widening. The wiry one tilted his head toward the newcomer. "What do we have here?" he muttered, his tone dripping with amusement. The burly man chuckled. "Looks like someone got lost on his way to the country club." Elon Musk didn't seem to notice the attention, or if he did, he gave no indication. He strode toward the convenience store with an air of calm that only served to highlight how out of place he seemed. His polished shoes clicked against the cracked concrete, the sound sharp and deliberate in the heavy stillness of the lot. As the glass door swung open, the cashier straightened slightly, his eyes darting between Elon and the bikers in the back. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking as he managed a greeting. "Afternoon." Elon nodded once, his gaze sweeping the store. The shelves were sparse, the fluorescent lighting harsh and unkind, but he seemed unbothered. He moved to the cooler, his hand hovering briefly over a row of water bottles before selecting one. The biker's low chuckles carried across the room. "Nice car you've got out there," the wiry biker called out, his voice loud enough to command the room. "You don't see a Tesla around these parts. What's the occasion, suit?" Elon turned, his expression placid as he regarded the man. "No occasion," he replied evenly. "Just passing through." The burly biker stepped forward, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Passing through, huh? You must be real lost. Not much out here for someone like you." Elon didn't respond right away. He took the bottle of water to the counter and placed it down, his movements calm and measured. "How much?" he asked the cashier, ignoring the bikers entirely. The cashier fumbled with the register, his hands trembling slightly. $2. Elon reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp bill, and handed it over. "Keep the change." The burly biker let out a sharp laugh, stepping closer. "Generous, aren't you? Bet you got plenty more where that came from, don't you?" Elon turned to face him fully, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The wiry biker took the opportunity to sidle up, standing just to Elon's side, his grin widening as he looked him up and down. "What's the matter, suit? You too good to talk to us?" the wiry man taunted. "Or are you just scared?" "I don't scare easily," Elon replied, his tone calm but carrying an edge that hinted at something unshakable. He stepped past them, heading toward the door. The burly biker moved quickly, blocking his path with a broad, muscular arm. "Hold up there," he said, his grin turning menacing. "We're just trying to have a conversation. You're not in that much of a hurry, are you?" Elon stopped, his gaze locking with the biker's. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet intensity that made the man falter for a fraction of a second. But the moment passed, and the burly man squared his shoulders, his bravado returning. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" the wiry biker said, circling behind Elon like a wolf sizing up its prey. "With your fancy car and your expensive suit. Bet you've never had to work a day in your life." Elon didn't respond. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. The cashier, sensing the tension, shifted nervously behind the counter. His eyes flicked toward the phone, but he didn't dare reach for it. The bikers were regulars here, and he knew better than to get involved. The burly biker leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You're not going anywhere, suit. Not until we've had some fun." Elon's expression didn't change. He looked at the man blocking his path, then at his companion behind him. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Be careful what you start." The words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. For a moment, the bikers hesitated, caught off guard by the quiet authority in his tone. But the moment passed, and their smirks returned, sharper than before. "Oh, we're just getting started," the burly man said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see what you're really made of." The tension in the room thickened, the air practically crackling with unspoken threats. Elon didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, waiting. The bikers' laughter echoed through the store, but there was an undercurrent of unease they couldn't quite shake. Something about the man before them didn't sit right. But they were too far gone to back down now. The game was on. Elon Musk stood motionless, his calm demeanor an almost eerie contrast to the bikers encircling him. The burly man blocking his path, with his thick arms crossed and a smug grin plastered across his face, leaned in slightly, his breath reeking of stale tobacco. His wiry counterpart was pacing in small, predatory steps, his eyes darting between Elon's face and the sleek Tesla still gleaming just outside the glass doors. "You're awful quiet, suit," the wiry man said, his tone mockingly light. He flicked his eyes toward the cashier, who was now fidgeting nervously with a pen, scribbling meaningless shapes on a crumpled receipt. "You think we're boring him, Marcus?" Marcus, the burly leader, chuckled. "Nah, he's just trying to figure out what to say without wetting his fancy pants. Ain't that right, suit?" Elon didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, his hands resting loosely by his sides. He was an island of calm in a room that felt like it was on the verge of boiling over. The contrast only seemed to irritate the bikers further. "You're not gonna say anything, huh?" Marcus sneered, taking a half-step closer. "What's the matter? Can't come up with something clever to save yourself?" The cashier coughed, his voice barely audible over the growing tension. "And maybe you guys should leave him alone," he ventured, his words hesitant and shaky. The wiry biker whipped around, his eyes narrowing. "Mind your business, old man," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to make the cashier shrink back. "You're not part of this." Elon's gaze flicked toward the cashier, a brief acknowledgement that didn't escape the biker's notice. Marcus tilted his head, his grin widening as he gestured toward the counter with a lazy wave of his hand. "See that, Charlie?" he said, his voice dripping with mock delight. "Our buddy here's got a soft spot for the locals. Maybe we should all sit down for a nice little chat. Get to know each other better." Charlie, the wiry one, snickered. "Oh yeah, real cozy. Maybe he can tell us how to make millions selling overpriced toys to yuppies." Elon finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I think you've misunderstood me." The bikers froze for a fraction of a second, caught off guard by the simplicity of the statement. But their hesitation quickly turned to laughter, the sound harsh and grating in the small space. "Misunderstood you?" Marcus repeated, his grin turning wolfish. Buddy, we understand you just fine. You think you're better than us. You think you can roll in here with your shiny car and your fancy suit and look down your nose at people like us. Well, let me tell you something. Why are you here? Elon interrupted, his tone cutting through Marcus's rant like a knife. The question wasn't aggressive, but it carried a weight that seemed to suck the air out of the room. What? Marcus asked, momentarily thrown off balance. Why are you here? Elon repeated, his gaze steady. What do you want? The question hung in the air, its simplicity making it all the more disarming. Marcus blinked, his bravado faltering just slightly before he recovered. We're here, he said, his voice rising as he stepped even closer, because this is our turf, and we don't like outsiders waltzing in like they own the place. Elon didn't move. You own this gas station? The question, delivered with the same calm tone as before, seemed to catch both bikers off guard. Charlie let out a bark of laughter, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Own it, he said, his voice dripping with derision. You really don't get it, do you, Suit? We own everything around here. Every road, every stop, every place worth stopping at. If you're here, you're on our turf. And that means you answer to us. Elon's eyes flicked between the two men, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and tense, as if the entire room was holding its breath. You should probably let me pass, Elon said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Before you do something you'll regret. Marcus's grin vanished, replaced by a scowl. You've got a lot of nerve, talking to me like that. It's not nerve, Elon replied. It's advice. The room seemed to vibrate with unspoken tension, the bikers bristling at the challenge in Elon's words. Marcus stepped closer, his fists clenching at his sides, while Charlie shifted on his feet, his hand twitching as if itching to reach for something. You've got no idea who you're dealing with? Marcus growled, his voice low and dangerous. Neither do you, Elon said simply. The response was like a match striking against stone. Marcus lunged forward, shoving Elon hard enough to send him stumbling back a step. The cashier gasped, his hand flying to his mouth as he watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. Elon steadied himself, his face still calm but his eyes sharper now, colder. He straightened his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate, as if the shove hadn't fazed him in the slightest. You just made a mistake, Elon said, his voice devoid of emotion. Marcus laughed, the sound rough and humorless. Oh, I made a mistake? That's rich. What are you gonna do about it, huh? Call the cops? Tell your lawyer? You think anyone out here's gonna care about your money? Charlie joined in the laughter, his voice echoing off the walls. Yeah, Suit, what are you gonna do? Run back to your little electric toy and drive off? Good luck with that. But Elon didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't back down. He stood his ground, his presence somehow more imposing now despite the bikers' attempts to intimidate him. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, the air so thick it felt like it might snap under the weight of what was coming. The cashier looked like he wanted to intervene but didn't dare, his eyes darting between the bikers and Elon as if trying to decide which was the greater threat. Marcus cracked his knuckles, his grin returning as he took another step forward. Let's see if that fancy suit of yours is as tough as you think you are. The cashier's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the counter, his unease radiating through the small convenience store. Every muscle in his face twitched with the instinct to intervene, but decades of working in forgotten places like this had taught him better. Intervening never ended well, especially when men like Marcus and Charlie were involved. Elon remained calm, his presence unsettlingly composed for a man surrounded by aggression. Marcus and Charlie, however, were anything but calm. The burly Marcus cracked his neck with a slow, deliberate motion, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man in the tailored suit before him. It wasn't fear he saw, it was something worse. Indifference. The lack of reaction was driving him insane. You've got a mouth on you, Suit, Marcus growled. But I'm not hearing much respect. So how about we fix that? Charlie chimed in, circling behind Elon like a scavenger sizing up its next meal. Yeah, a little respect might go a long way. Let's see how polite you can be after we've had a little chat. Elon's gaze remained fixed on Marcus, as if Charlie's presence behind him didn't matter. The sheer audacity of his disregard made Marcus take another step closer, his hand twitching as though itching to grab something or someone. "Answer me this suit," Marcus said, his voice low and venomous. "You pullin' up in a car like that, dressed like you just stepped out of a Fortune 500 meeting. What are you trying to prove? Huh? You think money makes you untouchable?" "No," Elon replied, his voice calm, almost conversational. "I think it makes people curious, and sometimes it makes them reckless." Marcus froze for half a beat, thrown off by the cryptic response. His scowl deepened as he tried to parse the meaning behind the words. "What the hell's that supposed to mean?" Charlie leaned in closer, his grin widening. "He's trying to sound smart, Marcus. Too bad it's just making him sound like a fool. Is that right?" Marcus muttered, his fist tightening. "You think we're reckless? That what you're saying, suit?" Elon didn't flinch. His calm expression remained, his eyes meeting Marcus's with an unwavering steadiness. "I'm saying you should think carefully about your next move." The room seemed to close in on itself, the tension stretching to a breaking point. The faint hum of the old radio was the only sound, its country tune a bizarre backdrop to the standoff. Charlie took another step closer, now standing directly behind Elon, while Marcus loomed in front of him. "Next move, huh?" Marcus said, his voice dripping with menace. "How's this for a move?" Without warning, Marcus reached out and shoved Elon again, harder this time. Elon stumbled back slightly, the force nearly sending him into Charlie's waiting arms. But instead of panicking, Elon caught himself with a measured step, his composure unbroken. The cashier gasped audibly, his eyes darting toward the phone on the counter. But he hesitated, the threat of retaliation from the bikers keeping him frozen in place. Elon adjusted his suit jacket with slow precision, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. "Another mistake," he said, his voice steady and unshaken. Marcus's face darkened, his anger bubbling just below the surface. "You think you're real clever, don't you? Keep talking like that, suit, and we'll see just how clever you are when you're flat on the ground." Charlie snickered, stepping closer until he was nearly shoulder to shoulder with Elon. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Too bad guts won't save you out here." Elon glanced at Charlie, his expression unreadable. "And what will?" The question hung in the air, its simplicity catching the wiry biker off guard. He blinked, his grin faltering for a fraction of a second before he forced it back into place. "Well, for starters, knowing when to shut up might help." Marcus stepped forward again, closing the distance between them until he was inches from Elon's face. "You don't seem to know when to quit," he growled. "So maybe we should teach you." The door to the convenience store swung open with a loud jingle, cutting through the tension like a knife. All three men turned toward the entrance as another figure entered, a young woman in a dusty sundress, her arms full of groceries. She froze in the doorway, her wide eyes darting between the bikers and Elon. The atmosphere in the room hit her like a physical force. Is this a bad time?" she asked hesitantly, her voice trembling. Marcus's sneer twisted into something resembling a grin. "Not at all, sweetheart. Just having a friendly chat with our buddy here." The woman hesitated, clearly unsure whether she should stay or turn around and leave. Her eyes flicked to Elon, searching for some kind of reassurance, but his expression remained calm, offering no clues. The cashier seized the opportunity to break the moment. "Hey, how about I ring you up real quick, miss? Get you out of here nice and fast." She nodded quickly, shuffling past the standoff toward the counter. Marcus and Charlie paid her little mind, their focus snapping back to Elon as soon as she moved away. "Where were we?" Marcus said, cracking his knuckles. "Oh yeah, teaching you a lesson." Elon took a small step back, not out of fear, but as if to give himself room to breathe. His gaze shifted between Marcus and Charlie, calculating, observing. "And what do you think you're going to teach me?" Marcus grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That out here, money doesn't mean a damn thing. Out here, respect is earned the hard way. And fear, Charlie added, his voice almost gleeful. Don't forget fear. Fear, Elon repeated, almost to himself. Interesting. His calmness was maddening. A wall they couldn't seem to break through no matter how hard they pushed. It was as if he wasn't playing their game, like he was operating on an entirely different level. The realization only fueled their anger. The cashier handed the woman her change with trembling hands, his eyes flicking back to the standoff as she gathered her things and hurried out the door. The tension in the room thickened once again, the temporary distraction doing nothing to diffuse the situation. Marcus stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. You've got one last chance, Suit. Either you start showing some respect or we're gonna make you. Charlie leaned in, his grin returning as he whispered, and we're real good at making people listen. Elon's gaze moved slowly between the two men, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. He said nothing, but the silence was louder than any words could have been. The air in the room was electric, charged with the anticipation of what was to come. The bikers were circling now, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators toying with their prey. But Elon didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, waiting, and it was driving them insane. The oppressive heat outside seeped into the convenience store, turning the cramped space into a pressure cooker of simmering tension. The cashier was all but cowering now, his attempts to distract himself with busy work failing miserably. His hands shook as he wiped at the counter with a rag, the nervous energy in the room making every sound, every creak of a shoe, every shuffle of movement, feel amplified. Marcus had taken to pacing now, his boots clunking heavily against the scuffed tiles. The sound was methodical, deliberate, as though he was marking time until the moment he decided to act. His eyes burned into Elon, who stood perfectly still, a picture of calm amidst the storm. You've got nothing to say, huh? Marcus spat, his voice louder now, more aggressive. That's fine. We've got all day, don't we, Charlie? Charlie nodded, his grin feral. All day. Long as it takes for Mr. Fancy Suit here to figure out how things work. Elon remained silent, his hands resting loosely at his sides. The faintest trace of a smile ghosted across his lips, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. But Marcus noticed, and it enraged him. You think this is funny? He snarled, stepping closer. You think you're smarter than us? Better than us? Let me tell you something, Suit, you're out of your league. Charlie stepped forward as well, the two bikers closing in like wolves. The cashier glanced toward the phone again, his fingers twitching with the urge to dial for help. But fear held him in place, the knowledge that doing so would only escalate the situation, keeping him frozen. Look at him, Marcus, Charlie said, his voice dripping with disdain. He's not scared, not even a little. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Yeah, Marcus muttered, his voice low and dangerous. Makes me wonder what he's hiding. The store seemed smaller now, suffocating under the weight of the escalating tension. The dull hum of the refrigerator units in the back was the only sound cutting through the oppressive silence, broken occasionally by the sharp scrape of Marcus's boots against the floor. The air felt heavy, charged with an anticipation that was almost unbearable. The wiry Charlie grinned as he moved closer to Elon, his steps slow and deliberate. You've got secrets, don't you, Suit? He said, circling him like a predator. Big, important secrets. Guys like you always do. Elon remained motionless, his calm gaze steady on Marcus. The lack of reaction only seemed to fuel Charlie's needling. He tapped a finger against his temple as if he were solving a riddle, his grin widening as he turned to Marcus. Think about it, Charlie said, his tone mockingly conspiratorial. A guy like him doesn't just stop at a place like this for no reason. Nah, he's hiding something. Something he doesn't want us to know. Marcus's scowl deepened, the veins in his neck pulsing as his fists clenched tighter. He wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed puzzles. He preferred answers, the kind he could pry loose with force if necessary. I don't care what he's hiding, Marcus growled, his voice low and menacing. I care about respect, and he doesn't have any for us. The cashier, now half hunched behind the counter, cleared his throat nervously. Maybe he's just passing through, he ventured, his voice shaking. You know, like he said. Charlie's head snapped toward the cashier, his grin vanishing in an instant. What did I tell you about minding your business, old man? He snapped. Don't make me come over there. The cashier froze, his face pale, his hand still gripping the rag he'd been using to wipe the counter. He nodded quickly, muttering, sorry. Won't happen again. Marcus turned his attention back to Elon, his expression dark and brooding. What do you think, Suit? You think you can just walk in here, act like you own the place, and then walk out without a care in the world? Elon didn't reply immediately. His silence was maddening. A calculated pause that stretched just long enough to set Marcus's teeth on edge. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and even. I didn't act like I owned the place. That's your assumption. The room fell silent again. Marcus's heavy breathing the only sound as his anger simmered just below the surface. Charlie let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Man, this guy's got balls. I'll give him that, Charlie said, his tone somewhere between admiration and mockery. But balls only get you so far, Suit. Out here, you need more than that. And what is it you think I need? Elon asked, his voice still devoid of fear or anger. Charlie's grin widened, his teeth flashing like a wolf about to pounce. Respect and fear. And if you don't have M, we make sure you learn M. Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between him and Elon until they were practically nose to nose. The cashier let out a shaky breath, his hand inching toward the phone on the counter. But one look from Marcus froze him in place. You listen to me, Suit, Marcus said, his voice a low growl. Out here, it doesn't matter how much money you've got or how many suits you own. Out here, you answer to us. And if you don't, he jabbed a thick finger into Elon's chest. You pay the price. Elon didn't flinch. He didn't step back or raise a hand to swat Marcus's finger away. He simply stood there, his expression calm but his eyes sharp, like he was taking in every detail of the man before him. What's the price? Elon asked quietly. Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the question. His scowl returned quickly, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You really want to find out? He snarled. Maybe he thinks we're bluffing, Charlie said, stepping closer to Marcus's side. Maybe we ought to show him we're not. The unspoken threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The cashier shifted nervously, his hand finally reaching the phone. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the buttons as he glanced toward the bikers, then back at Elon. The tension in the room was unbearable now, a taut wire ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Elon's gaze flicked briefly to the cashier, then back to Marcus. You're right about one thing, he said, his voice still calm. Out here, money doesn't mean much, but power means everything. The words sent a ripple through the room, their weight landing squarely on Marcus and Charlie. The bikers exchanged a glance, their bravado faltering for a fraction of a second before they forced their sneers back into place. What are you trying to say, Suit? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. You think you've got power? Out here? You don't have a damn thing. Elon didn't respond. His silence was deafening, a quiet challenge that only seemed to stoke the biker's anger further. Marcus stepped closer, his hand twitching at his side as though he were seconds away from swinging a fist. You think you're better than us, don't you? Marcus said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. You think you can just stand there and look down on us like we're nothing? I don't think that, Elon replied evenly. But you do. The response was like a slap in the face. Marcus's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding audibly as his fists clenched and unclenched. Charlie let out a short, humorless laugh, his grin twisting into something darker. Man, you've got a death wish, don't you? Charlie said, shaking his head. I almost feel bad for you. I don't need your pity, Elon said, his gaze locked on Marcus. I need you to think carefully about what you're about to do. The words hung in the air, their meaning unmistakable. But Marcus was too far gone now, his anger drowning out any sense of reason. He took another step forward, his fist rising slightly as he prepared to make good on his threat. The cashier's trembling hand finally landed on the phone, his fingers shaking as he started to dial. But before he could press the final button, Charlie's sharp eyes caught the movement. He turned quickly, his hand darting out to slam the receiver back onto the cradle. "I said mind your business," Charlie barked, his voice loud enough to make the cashier flinch. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real change in his expression since the confrontation began. But he still didn't move, his calm presence standing in stark contrast to the chaos brewing around him. Marcus loomed over him now, his fist poised to strike. "You've got one last chance, Suit. Say something smart. Say something to make me stop." Elon looked up at him, his voice quiet but steady. "You won't stop." The words were like a trigger. Marcus's fist twitched, the room holding its breath as the moment stretched on. The breaking point just seconds away. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. The silence was deafening, the kind of quiet that preceded an explosion. Marcus stood with his fist raised, trembling with the effort of holding himself back, or perhaps trembling with rage. Charlie's grin had vanished, replaced by a predatory stillness as he watched the confrontation unfold. The cashier had backed into the corner behind the counter, his hand gripping the edge as though it might anchor him against the storm brewing in the center of the store. Elon Musk remained perfectly still. His expression was calm, his gaze locked on Marcus, unflinching. But there was something different now, a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't fear and it wasn't submission. It was confidence, quiet, calculated, and utterly unshakable. "Do it," Elon said, his voice quiet but cutting through the tension like a blade. "Hit me." Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off by the challenge. His fist faltered, hovering in the air as his brain scrambled to process the words. Charlie, standing a few feet behind, let out a disbelieving laugh. "Did you just?" Charlie started, his voice trailing off. "Man, this guy's insane." "No," Elon said, his voice steady, "but I'm curious. How far are you willing to take this?" The question landed like a grenade in the room, its implications rippling through the tense air. Marcus's face twisted in confusion and anger, his fist slowly lowering as his confidence began to waver. "What the hell are you talking about?" Elon tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You've spent this entire time trying to intimidate me, trying to prove you're in control. But you're not, and you know it." The words hit Marcus harder than any punch could have. His fist dropped to his side, his jaw clenching as he struggled to regain his footing. Charlie stepped closer, his voice rising to fill the silence. "Hey, don't listen to him, Marcus. He's just trying to mess with your head." "No," Elon said again, his gaze shifting briefly to Charlie. "I'm stating a fact. You've already lost control of this situation. You just don't realize it yet." Marcus's face turned a deep shade of red, his anger bubbling dangerously close to the surface. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he spat. "You think you've got all the answers." Elon's gaze returned to Marcus, his expression unyielding. "I think you're scared." The room went deathly silent. Even the cashier, who had been silently praying for this to end, froze at the weight of those words. Marcus's eyes widened briefly before narrowing into slits, his hands balling into fists again. "You don't know a damn thing about me," Marcus growled, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what you're capable of," Elon replied. "And that's why you're scared. Because deep down, you know you're outmatched." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Marcus took a step back, his confidence cracking under the weight of Elon's unwavering calm. Charlie's grin faltered, replaced by a look of uncertainty as he glanced between Marcus and Elon. "What are you even talking about?" Charlie asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "What makes you think you're so much better than us?" Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek, black device. It looked like a phone, but the design was unlike anything the bikers or the cashier had ever seen before. Elon held it up, his thumb hovering over the screen. "You think this is about me being better than you?" Elon asked, his tone measured. "It's not. It's about understanding the consequences of your actions. Something you clearly haven't thought through. Marcus stared at the device, his anger momentarily giving way to confusion. What the hell is that? This? Elon said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Is your reality check? Before Marcus or Charlie could respond, Elon tapped the screen. A faint beep echoed through the room, followed by a low hum that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. The bikers stiffened, their eyes darting around the store as the hum grew louder, resonating in their chests like a distant thunderstorm. What is that? Charlie demanded, his voice rising in panic. What the hell did you just do? Elon didn't answer. He simply stood there, his expression unreadable as the hum reached a crescendo and then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, more oppressive than anything that had come before. Marcus took a shaky step forward, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the unknown. What did you do? He repeated, his voice trembling. Elon finally broke his silence, his gaze sharp as a knife. I warned you to think carefully about your actions. You didn't listen. The door to the convenience store swung open, the jingle of the bell startling everyone in the room. A tall man in a uniform stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. His badge glinted in the harsh fluorescent light, and his hand rested on the holstered weapon at his side. The cashier let out a shaky breath, relief flooding his face. Officer, thank God. I was just about to call. The officer raised a hand, silencing the cashier. His eyes swept over the room, landing first on the bikers, then on Elon. There was no mistaking the authority in his gaze, nor the subtle nod he gave Elon as he stepped further inside. Is there a problem here? The officer asked, his voice calm but firm. Marcus and Charlie froze, their earlier confidence now replaced by uncertainty and panic. They exchanged nervous glances, their hands twitching as if unsure whether to raise them in surrender or keep them clenched in defiance. Elon didn't move, his expression unchanged. He let the officer's presence do the talking, the weight of authority settling heavily on the biker's shoulders. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Charlie shifted uncomfortably, his bravado all but gone. The officer's gaze lingered on Marcus, his expression hard. You've got about 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't arrest you for harassment. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked to Charlie for help, but the wiry biker was already inching toward the door, his eyes darting between the officer and Elon. We didn't, Marcus stammered, his earlier aggression dissolving into incoherence. The officer didn't respond. He simply stared them down, his presence a wall they couldn't hope to breach. And behind him, Elon stood silently, his calm demeanor unshaken, his eyes watching as the biker's facade crumbled. The balance of power had shifted, and Marcus and Charlie were beginning to realize they were no longer in control. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Marcus and Charlie stood frozen, their confidence unraveling in the face of the officer's unyielding stare. The badge on his chest might as well have been a spotlight, illuminating the cracks in their bravado. Behind him, Elon remained as composed as ever, his presence a quiet but undeniable force in the room. You've got about 3 seconds left, the officer said, his tone colder now, each word landing with the weight of a hammer. Explain yourselves. Now. Marcus licked his lips nervously, his fists unclenching as his body seemed to shrink under the officer's gaze. We weren't doing anything wrong, he muttered, his voice lacking the fire it had carried just minutes earlier. Just talking, the officer repeated, his eyebrows lifting in mock disbelief. That what you call cornering someone and threatening them? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like harassment. Charlie, always quick with a quip, opened his mouth to respond but found the words dying in his throat. The officer's piercing gaze turned to him, pinning him in place like a bug under a magnifying glass. He shuffled his feet uncomfortably, his earlier swagger nowhere to be found. We didn't mean any harm, Marcus tried again, his voice cracking slightly. Just having a little fun. Fun? The officer's tone sharpened, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. Because it looks to me like you were about to escalate this into something a lot more serious. So let me ask you this. Is there something you need to tell me? Or should I start writing up an incident report? The mention of an incident report made Marcus's face pale, his shoulders slumping further as he struggled to maintain eye contact. Charlie took another step back, his fingers twitching at his sides as if he were calculating his odds of slipping out the door unnoticed. I think we've got a misunderstanding here, Marcus said weakly, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to explain. We didn't mean anything by it. The officer tilted his head slightly, his gaze hard and unrelenting. Then why's the cashier over there looking like he's about to pass out? Why is this guy, he gestured toward Elon, whose calm expression remained unchanged, standing here with two of you breathing down his neck like you're about to throw punches? Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He glanced at Charlie, who avoided his gaze, his eyes darting to the door and back. The officer's hand shifted slightly, resting more firmly on his holstered weapon, and the subtle movement made both bikers stiffen. Let me make this simple for you, the officer said, his voice low and deliberate. I don't care who you think you are or what you think you can get away with. Out here, the law isn't optional, and you're on very thin ice. Marcus's jaw clenched, his fists tightening briefly before he forced them to relax. He was trapped, and he knew it. The arrogance that had fueled him earlier was gone, replaced by a simmering frustration that had no outlet. I said we didn't mean any harm, Marcus muttered, his words barely audible. We'll just leave. You're not going anywhere yet, the officer snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. We're not done here. Charlie's head whipped around, his panic bubbling to the surface. What do you mean, we're not done? We didn't do anything. The officer's gaze shifted to Charlie, his eyes narrowing. Didn't do anything? Harassing someone isn't nothing. Threatening someone isn't nothing. You think I'm gonna let you walk out of here like this never happened? Charlie's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his usual sharp tongue failing him completely. The officer's words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. The cashier, still huddled behind the counter, looked like he wanted to cheer but didn't dare move a muscle. I think you owe this man an apology, the officer said, his tone hard enough to chip stone. Right now. Marcus's eyes flicked to Elon, who stood as still as a statue, his gaze unwavering. Something about the way Elon looked at him, calm, confident, and completely unimpressed, made Marcus's stomach churn. He hated this feeling, this loss of control, but he hated the idea of being arrested even more. Sorry, Marcus mumbled, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Didn't mean any disrespect. Elon said nothing, his expression unreadable. He didn't move, didn't react, and the lack of acknowledgement made Marcus's face flush with anger and humiliation. Charlie muttered something under his breath, his hands twitching at his sides. What was that? The officer demanded, his voice sharp. I said sorry, Charlie snapped, louder this time, though his tone was anything but apologetic. His eyes darted between Marcus and the officer, his frustration bubbling dangerously close to the surface. The officer didn't look convinced, but he let the silence drag on, the tension in the room thickening with every passing second. Finally, he turned to Elon, his expression softening slightly. Sir, the officer said, his tone shifting to one of professional respect. Is there anything you'd like to say? Elon remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Marcus and Charlie. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice calm and measured. I warned them. They didn't listen. The simplicity of the statement made Marcus flinch, his fists clenching tightly at his sides. Charlie looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it, his face twisting into a mask of barely contained frustration. You're lucky, the officer said, his voice directed at the bikers now. Because if he wanted to press charges, you'd both be in handcuffs right now. And trust me, you don't want to see how things go from there. Marcus and Charlie exchanged a glance, their earlier bravado completely drained. The officer's words hit harder than any punch, the reality of their situation sinking in like a weight dragging them under. "I suggest you think long and hard about your next moves," the officer continued, his voice icy. "Because if I get another call about you, if I hear even a whisper about you causing trouble, it won't end with a conversation." The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Marcus swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping further as he nodded silently. Charlie muttered something under his breath but didn't dare speak loud enough for anyone to hear. The balance of power had shifted completely, and the bikers knew it. They weren't in control anymore. They were exposed, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of the man they had tried to intimidate. And Elon? He still hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any words ever could. The store felt different now, as if the weight that had been pressing down on it for the past hour had finally begun to lift. Marcus and Charlie were visibly deflated, their earlier bravado reduced to nothing more than awkward fidgeting and averted gazes. The officer remained a looming presence, his posture firm and commanding as he made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere until they understood the gravity of their actions. "You'll leave now," the officer said, his tone brooking no argument. "And you'll leave quietly. Don't even think about coming back here." Marcus nodded stiffly, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. Charlie muttered something under his breath, but quickly shut up when the officer's gaze landed on him. Slowly, they backed away, their steps hesitant as though they were retreating from the battlefield of a war they'd lost. As they reached the door, Marcus turned slightly, throwing a final glance at Elon. For a moment, it looked like he might say something, perhaps a last attempt to salvage his pride. But one look at Elon's calm, composed expression shut him down completely. He turned back and pushed the door open, the jingle of the bells sounding almost hollow as they disappeared into the harsh sunlight outside. The cashier let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging as if a weight had been lifted from him as well. "Thank you," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what was going to happen there." The officer gave him a curt nod before turning his attention back to Elon. For the first time, his stern expression softened into something resembling a smile. "You handled yourself well," he said, his tone respectful. "Most people would have lost their cool in a situation like that." Elon finally moved, adjusting his suit jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. "Losing your cool usually means losing control," he replied. "And control is everything." The officer chuckled softly, nodding as though he couldn't agree more. "Fair enough. If you need anything else, let me know. I'll be right outside." With that, the officer turned and walked out, leaving Elon and the cashier alone in the now quiet store. The cashier stared at Elon for a long moment, his eyes wide with something that resembled awe. "Who are you?" he asked finally, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. Elon glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Just someone passing through," he said simply, picking up his water bottle from the counter. He turned and walked toward the door, his steps unhurried and purposeful. As he reached the Tesla, now shimmering in the sunlight, he paused and looked back at the store. Marcus and Charlie were nowhere to be seen, their motorcycles gone from the lot. The officer stood near his cruiser, watching the horizon like a sentry. Elon's gaze lingered for a moment before he got into the car, the door closing with a quiet, mechanical precision. The Tesla came to life with a soft hum, its electric engine a stark contrast to the roaring bikes that had filled the lot earlier. Slowly, it pulled out onto the highway, its sleek form disappearing down the long stretch of road. Back inside, the cashier stood at the counter, still processing everything that had just happened. He glanced at the spot where Marcus had stood, then back at the road where Elon's car had vanished. A small smile crossed his face as he muttered under his breath, "Guess some people are just built different. What just happened here? Folks, let's take a moment to break it down." Elon Musk didn't fight back with his fists. He didn't shout, threaten, or even raise his voice. He showed us something far more powerful: the strength of staying calm under pressure. In a situation where most of us might lose control, Elon stood his ground with composure and let the antagonists crumble under their own weight. Now, here's the real question. What would you have done in his shoes? Could you hold your ground against intimidation? Or would you let the tension get the best of you? It's easy to think we'd act bravely, but when the stakes are high and emotions are running wild, staying calm is often the hardest and smartest thing to do. Moments like these remind us why composure matters. It's not just about winning an argument or shutting someone down. It's about controlling the narrative, even when it feels like everything is spiraling out of control. Elon didn't just survive that encounter. He owned it without ever lifting a finger. So, what's your takeaway from this story? Did it inspire you to think differently about how you handle conflict? Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done differently? And if this story gave you chills or taught you something about resilience, hit that like button and share it with someone who could use the reminder. And hey, if you're not already part of our growing community, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe for more unforgettable moments and stories that inspire, challenge, and entertain. Because sometimes, it's not about being the loudest person in the room, it's about being the most unshakable. Stay cool, stay confident, and we'll see you in the next story.